Welcome to this episode of Sound Connections. Today we have Mark Johnson, a 44-year veteran of our industry, sound guy, writer, marketer, and educator. So thanks for coming, Mark.
Hey, glad to be here. I always like coming here.
We tend to have a little fun here. So you're not your first time here, but your first time here as a guest on our show.
Yeah, and I'm honored actually to be here.
And we're honored to have you. So, I think, I was thinking about this morning. We've known each other about 10 years. I think, since your time at Full Sail really is when I met you. Right. And, over that time, it's been great working with you. I really enjoy it, truly enjoy it.
Thank
you. But then, we've also developed a friendship, and I know a little bit about you, and a little bit about your personal life, and we share some of those details. But as I started thinking about the podcast, I'm like, holy crap, there's a lot I actually don't know. Right? But I think mainly about your career. So I know you as a writer and as an educator at Full Sail. Mm-hmm. But I took a peek at your LinkedIn profile. And that's how I knew you'd been. I knew you'd been in business a long time. But
right.
And I know you'd made mention of some of your early days, like at Opryland, so I figured we would talk about some of that today.
Okay.
And Sound Connections, bringing people together, telling our stories, about our industry.
Yeah.
And you've kind of done some things a little different than a lot of us get to do. So.
That I have, and I'm incredibly thankful, and kind of when I do get the opportunities to kind of reflect on my career, because I am a lot older than these young whippersnappers, and certainly a lot older than a lot of the people who come through Full Sail, who, in my mind, one of the reasons why I wanted to come back to Full Sail was because of the opportunities to get into these career fields that I've had, and I've had a few different career fields.
Yeah.
But they can kind of take a shorter route, I guess, than I took. And be on the road or be in a career a lot faster. A lot of what I went through was on the job learning or being fortunate enough to hook up with some really good mentors and really good teachers who, gave of their time while we're working on gigs and things like that to kind of take me under their wings and help me along. But it's been a great ride. I actually had no intentions of going in kind of this aspect or even any of the other aspects that I wound up in. I guess I'm a kind of a guy that likes to just kind of follow the path.
Well, many people, I shouldn't say most people, many people that end up in our industry, many of them it's not on purpose, and some of them is, maybe they're musicians and, started out in a band and found their way onto the AV side or the sound side of the business, doing production work or, so I noticed that you got your bachelor's degree at Clark University in expanded cinema. So first of all, I have no idea what expanded cinema is. So I want to know a little bit about that. But did you know then? Were you splicing tape at 10 years old? What's your deal?
Not a clue. It was I don't know. I mean, when I was in high school, we had a project in an English class of all things to do some creative writing, and the guest lecturer for that class was a guy who had written for television comedies and things like that. So, and we had to partner up with somebody else in the class. So the guy and I wrote a little thing about the invention of the wheel and fire and some other things, and copped illustrations from the old comic BC. Do you remember that?
Oh,
comic?
yeah.
Yeah. And made a whole thing and storyboarded it out and things like that. And one day we walked into class and she said, "Go get Steven, I need to talk to you," the instructor said. And she said, "Bud read your piece and thought it was the best thing that he's ever seen."
Oh, wow.
from high school students.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. That's great.
And so he wants you guys to go talk to some people at Hanna-Barbera. So we got out of school one day, which was, that was a blessing itself.
Yeah.
And we had just my friend and I, Steven Tatsumi was his name, and we were already buddies. We rode motorcycles together and things like that. But we went to the Hanna-Barbera studios in Burbank, and it was just amazing. We met with people, and the upshot was that they don't buy cartoons; they develop them in their own in-house. So it never came of anything, but it was always kind of interesting to me. And I really didn't have a career in mind when I went to college, and I was just going to go to college just to go to college, right? And when I got there, they had a video production course, and I had just kind of met some people. I kind of went to the college not knowing too much about it, but it got me across the country away from home. So I went there.
Yeah, it's like grew up in California, went to
college in Worcester, Massachusetts. So so I just kind of fell into it, and I always kind of am leaned towards the artistic side, and so I started doing video production. And literally, one day I was walking across campus, and one of the guys that I had met, who was an upperclassman, literally drove up in his car and said, "Mark Johnson, we've been looking for you. Get in." And I said, "Okay, okay." And so I jumped in the car, and we went off to work on a video production, and that's how my whole career was, basically, just kind of being drug along initially. But really enjoying it when I got to do whatever I did. I just ran video camera for that particular event, but I was working on another event, and I was doing like a boom microphone type of thing. I had a shotgun microphone on a thing, and the guy who was doing audio was just talking about doing live sound, and I said, "Well, that's kind of interesting to me, Can I hang out with you?" And he was doing all the live sound for all the events on campus. And so I just started kind of hanging out with him and learning the trade. But the expanded cinema part came from, I guess I was always kind of interested in visual stuff. And I would do, it's another way of saying experimental film and videos. We called them personal videos, or personal films back in the day, where you largely shot on Super 8 or 16 millimeter or things like that, and they're relatively short. And there's at that point in the 70s, early 70s, there were a lot of people who would make these films that were effectively motion art pieces. Mm-hmm. And I was always really interested in that, and still am, although I haven't really done anything. But it was just interesting to me in that eye. And so the major was a self-design major. They didn't really have a film major or anything like that in the school, but they did have film courses. There was actually one of my instructors was pretty famous in the world of film critiquing and things like that, Anthony Hodgkinson. And he's another guy who was kind of a mentor of mine, and I wound up becoming friends with some of the instructors who would teach me that. But I always kind of kept my hand in the creative aspects of it. So that's kind of how my expanded cinema major came across.
It's kind of cool that you kind of it's the first I've heard of this sort of designing your own degree.
Yeah,
right?
that
So
was one of the cool things that the school offered. An ability to do
that's kind of neat, because oftentimes you're pigeonholed into one thing or another,
Right.
and it's not quite what you want, So that's kind of neat.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that allowed me to actually graduate was.
Otherwise, you'd still be there.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
So while you're in college, you're doing some cinema work or film work. You're doing video production. And then you're doing live sound work. So I don't know. I don't remember when I looked. I see you went to work at Opryland, which is a little bit away from Worcester.
It's a minute or two.
Yeah, a minute or two away from Worcester, and I don't know if there was a gap there, but did you go straight from college to Opryland, or did you make a stop in between?
Yeah, I definitely made a stop in between. I had been doing, kind of following the footsteps of my friend that was teaching me the live sound at school, and at one point he transferred out, and the words exactly were, well, who's going to do these shows now that you're leaving? And he said, you will. And it was like, those cartoon yo-yo, and I said, do you think I can? And he said, yeah, absolutely. You know what you're doing. And so I kind of filled in for him, and you learn a lot when you're kind of on the job learning, and fortunately I didn't do any real serious crashes and burns, but I learned a lot. So I graduated. Actually, I didn't graduate at that point. I left, and I had a couple of projects to finish up, a couple of films, and I finished them up, and I moved to Northern California, where I just basically crashed on the couch in my brother's place, and started looking for work. And I would bounce back and forth between my brother's place in Northern California and my dad's place in Southern California. And the first job I got out of college was working in a store called The Good Guys. And it's not like The Good Guys electronics store. It was kind of more like a Target and things like that.
Okay.
And I worked in the furniture department of all places. And I did that for a while until I saved up my money, and then I actually moved back up and crashed with my brother. And through his girlfriend's mother, who was the principal at a high school, I got a job in the AV department as their AV coordinator, and I looked after all the gear and set up projectors and did that. And while I was there, my friend from college who taught me live sound called me up and said, hey, you want to come to Nashville and work at Opryland and mix a show? And it's like, well, yeah, I kind of do. Can I do it? He said, absolutely. He says. So
did Opryland have the same, right now that's like, everybody knows what it is. So back then, was it as well known? Like, was it a sort of, did you know what a prestigious place it was to work at the time?
I had some clues because I'd known that my friend had worked there. He had been fairly highly placed in the production world there, and so I kind of knew what it was about, and I worked in the theme park area of it, not the Grand Ole Opry House. Although I during my time there, I did do some shows within the Opry House itself. So I started out mixing a 50s rock and roll show, which again was, a great learning experience because, you're dealing more this was 6 days a week throughout the whole course of the summer.
Yeah.
And the job was a seasonal job, but I took it knowing that it was a seasonal job. But I wound up working through the winters, building sets and scenery for the following year. And so I wound up being there for an overall period of 10 years. Part of them is seasonal, and ultimately I got hired on full-time, and I was, I can't remember exactly what my title was, but I was effectively the assistant technical director. I mostly dealt with shows that we did off-site. We had a production company built into the thing, and we would go do corporate productions and events for different corporate customers who would hire the production show that we would do within the park typically, or sometimes they would take the creative team and they would write a show for the client.
And then would these productions happen within the park, or would it sometimes be outside the park?
Yes, both.
Both.
Yeah. So we would do them, well, not necessarily within the park, but we were connected. Our next door neighbors was the Opryland Hotel, so we just moved the show over there and do it over there. And sometimes we would take a show and move it someplace else. So I did that off and on over the next, as I said, 10-year period. At one point, again, one of the things that I tell the students when at Full Sail is one of the most important things that I feel in the world of professional production, or just in the world of being a professional, is networking with your peers and things like that. So one of the roommates of the keyboard player in the band that I was mixing came into our little sound booth and said, I heard from Steve, who was the keyboard player, that you were interested in working in TV production. I said, yeah, that's kind of what my training was, and through college, and that's kind of like where I'd like to go. And he says, well, we're looking for somebody at the TV station where he had worked. And I went, oh, cool. And he gave me a phone number, and I called the number, and the guy, funny backstory, I told my wife, the woman who was my wife at the time, that, I'm supposed to call this guy Larry Sullivan. And she said, Larry Sullivan, I know him.
What?
And my wife, my ex-wife, was a singer, a really good singer. And that's how we met at Opryland. She was a performer there. I was a technician there.
Yeah.
And so a sound guy and a singer, that's, well, like I say, ex-wife. So I called the number, and he says, yeah, Glenn, who was the guy who was my keyboard player's friend, Glenn told me all about you. Why don't you come down to the station? And I said, cool, I'll let me know the time. And then I said, by the way, somebody that I'm connected to now, her name is Sean Johnson, but she used to be Sean Carter. And he went, Sean Carter, oh my, he wanted to record her. He was a audio engineer himself.
Okay.
And so he wanted to record her. And that never happened, but so it was kind of, serendipitous meeting, and then I go down to the station and talk with him and talk with the chief engineer there, and ultimately got the job. It went well for a long time. Well, not a long time. Went well for about a year, and then the station kind of changed its direction. So they wound up letting go the majority of the staff, and actually my friend who got me hired, he and I got fired at the same day at the same time. We're sitting there, get called to the chief engineer's office, and it's like, okay, time to go. It's like, okay, so...
yeah, I have some friends in TV. It's kind of a bit of a brutal industry like that.
It is.
I've heard a lot of stories over the years, very similar stories.
Yeah. So that was after I'd been there about a year, and I went back to Opryland, and fortunately they would have me, and even though it didn't end well, I had my time at the TV station. Again, I learned so much.
Oh yeah, you learn.
know,
Yeah,
it was, and I often tell people one of the hardest mixing jobs that I ever had was the 5 o'clock news. You know, you watch it and you look at it from a viewer perspective and you think, oh, it's just a guy sitting in a chair, or the weatherman up there, but it goes like that. And
and it's a lot of pressure.
Yeah,
because it's live broadcast.
And there's tens of thousands or maybe even hundreds of thousands of people listening to your product. And so I kind of realized that one night when I was doing the nighttime news, and kind of went, wow, this is there's some pressure here, and there's some. I really need to make sure that every day I bring my A game. So I really worked hard at that.
And I think some of our best engineers in the industry have a broadcast experience or background even. I think there's something about that kind of environment, where it has to be right every time. Right?
Well, that's television, at least from an audio standpoint, and probably from many other standpoints. It's like doing live audio. You have your shot.
Yeah.
And the news may be the news the next night and the next night and the next night, but for that moment in time, that's your shot. And it's not like doing making a record where it's like, let's try this.
Let's just do it over.
Let's try it this way.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it was a great experience for me. And then going back to Opryland, it was still a good experience, and I learned a lot. But at one of the points where I was after the television job, and before I went back to Opryland, I got hired to go out and do a show in San Francisco. And we went to this venue in San Francisco, and I was looking up at these little bitty speakers up in the facility that we had to use, and I'm thinking, are those the speakers that we have to use for this gig? And it wasn't any power really required. It was actually just a bluegrass group that I was mixing. But I'm thinking, there's no way these speakers are going to cover this facility. And I talked to the guy who installed them, and I said, what's the deal with these speakers? I said, I can't recognize them. And he said, oh, there's a guy across the bay here. He's kind of a hippie guy, and he invented these things. And he says, they're really cool. And I said, okay, let's give it a shot. And I thought they were phenomenal. And I'm thinking, what were they? I couldn't remember. And I go back to Opryland. I'm working at Opryland, and the best way we had in those days, this was pre-internet and everything, we're looking at all the industry magazines. So, and I remember I was going through an issue of Pro Sound News, and I saw an ad for those speakers, and it's like Meyer Sound, and they had Grateful Dead and things like that. And I go tell my colleagues, those are the ones.
Those are the speakers, yeah.
Those are the ones. So I called the number, and I got a hold of the company, and they arranged a demo. The closest system they had was actually in Austin, Texas. So they were still very in their youthful stage of the company.
Yeah.
Just starting out, and they sent the demo system, and we wound up keeping it. We bought it from them, and.
So where'd you guys install? Was it installed, or was it a production rig?
Well, we actually it was a production rig. We would take it out to do some of the various shows. We had a small show that was going out on a tour, probably like a 6-week tour or something like that. So that's what we used the system for initially, and then we would just use it for gigs and events. And I remember once we had Chic. Remember that group? Chic?
Yeah.
Come in. And they wanted a big PA, mostly for the visual aspect because they're Chic, right?
Right.
And so I piled up a bunch of cabinets that we had laying around, and put the it was a UPA system, a Meyer UPA system. Put that kind of at head height for the audience, and then piled up a bunch of other gear. And that was the only thing I had turned on, you know. But the road manager came in, and that was one of the things, is they wanted a system that looked cool, right?
Yeah.
And other than that, you know, obviously they wanted it to sound cool, but they were more interested in the look.
Yeah.
And so he said, yeah, okay, it looks good, and it worked great. And we used that system for lots of different acts coming in. That would come, we would do special shows, and those were the things that I was involved in coordinating, and so I did that for a long time. You know, for Opryland, we did.
What's the either the coolest act or the most interesting memory you have from doing that type of work with this? So you got your Meyer system now, and you're doing these productions. Like, anything come to mind?
Oh wow, there's
there's probably a few, right?
yeah, and Meyer system or notwithstanding, had the opportunity to mix some really interesting shows, a really wide variety of shows. My final years there, I was also kind of like a relief mixer. So if somebody was sick, I'd go in and mix their show. And for those that know about what Opryland did back in those days, there were different thematic shows. Like there was a country music show, a show about kind of music in the 1920s, a history of America through music, and you know, the rock and roll shows that I started out there and things like that. And one of the things was I just remember going in and having to mix 3 different shows in one day, and they all have different feels because they're you know, different types of times of the history of the world, or you know, the rock and roll show versus a 1920s show versus you know, so trying to establish a different feel through the mix was really interesting to me, and that was cool. But I remember we did it's funny and it's sad. We did a Doc Severinsen show that was, you know, he came in and he brought his band, and he brought his fusion band. So the audience, though, had no clue that he was going to bring his fusion band, right. Even though it was kind of advertised as such. So I think they expected him to come in and play the Tonight Show theme,
right? You
know, over and over again for an hour and a half, and so he's playing. You know, I mean, he's way out there. It's fusion. It's jazz fusion. And I was talking to him after the show because a lot of people left, and some people came up and said, "You tell him the next time he comes here, if he sees a crowd of old ladies in the audience, he needs to play, you know, appropriate material." And I'm saying, you know, okay, well, I'm not in charge of his creative, you know, what he's going to do. And I went to, after the show, I was talking to him, and I said, "Wow," I said, you know, what you were playing was cool because it was amazing to me. And I said, "But you know, a lot of people were not expecting what you were playing." And he said, "I know. I was afraid to close my eyes during a solo or something because I figured I'd open them up and there wouldn't be anybody there." So that was interesting. But just having a wide variety of opportunities for me was cool. But while I was there, I became a great fan of products from Meyer Sound.
Yeah, so I was going to ask you. I mean, I was guessing the connection there.
Uh-huh.
So that first experience in Northern California, and then the experience you had working with their gear, you know, that's what took you or made you want to kind of reach out to them, or did, you know, Yeah.
So I reached out to them and got the gear and that we used.
Yeah.
And it was rock solid, which is part of what they advertised back in the day: great sound and reliability. And so we would do shows with that, and we kind of held that as a standard for a long time there. And we were doing this one show that we would do every year about this time, actually. We would do a Christmas show in the Opryland Hotel that was written specifically for doing this show in the Opryland Hotel. And the first year that we did it, I had a little UPA cluster, and it was a show that we did in the hotels, just like a normal hotel show. And where it's not really a place where you really want to do a show, right? A production show, and where we had lots of distance miking, because it was kind of a very musical theater kind of performance in a hotel ballroom. So we had challenges, wireless challenges, all sorts of things. Yeah. So after we did that first year, we did kind of a post-mortem, and I said, okay, we got to make the next shot better. So I called a company called Systems Wireless, and they were, at the time, they were the big wireless guys.
I know those guys.
And developed a good friendship with the owner at that time, and he came out, and for us it was a lot. We had 20 wireless microphones, and so you're thinking about,
back then that was a lot.
That's a lot at the time.
It wasn't typical, right?
Yeah, it's a lot at the time. And I called Meyer Sound, and I said we had this Meyer rig, and we had problems. And I was talking to Helen Meyer, and she said, well, we never want that to happen to you again. And I said, one of the things I think would be beneficial for us is this SIM, the source independent measurement thing that they had recently been promoting, and I'd been reading about it. And she said, and I said, the biggest problem is I have no money. I have nothing as a budget. And she said, well, okay, we have a year to figure out how to make it work. And I kept in touch with them, and they shipped us out a SIM machine and somebody to drive it for us. And we set it up, and with the wireless, and the guy from Systems Wireless came out himself, the owner came out himself. And I have pictures of him, sitting behind the stack of wireless receivers. And we had the SIM machine sitting out in the, at front of house. And it worked great. Everything worked great. And it was all very exciting for us. And so, of course, the first thing I do is call Helen Meyer and say it was fabulous. It was, it worked really well. And the deal was basically that we Opryland do an ad for them, for Meyer Sound, so that they could run it in the...
Yeah, or a case study, so show how well it worked. You guys had a challenge, you solved the problem.
Right.
That's awesome.
So and it turns out that we were one of the, other than like the San Francisco Opera or Pavarotti or something like that, we were some of the first commercial users of SIM. We were very early on in the evolution of SIM.
Yeah.
So I had developed a good relationship with the company, with Meyer Sound by then, as a customer, and something that I could be comfortable with, and just calling them and talking to them about audio and things like that. So I called him up at one point and said, hey, I'm thinking about making a career change, so if there's anything that you know of in the industry, let me know.
Yeah.
And she said, well, we might have something here. And so that I wound up working as and so again, the networking thing, right?
Yeah,
I talked to a contact that I had for a couple of years, but I wound up going there as technical sales support. So I would go out and do service calls.
So in those situations, like the one you were in, you might have been the guy they would have sent out to Opryland to help,
exactly,
help from the Meyer perspective, tech the event.
Exactly. And that's exactly what I did. So my first 2 service calls one was about a month after I got to the factory, and Helen Meyer calls me up at home. She says, you need to get to the Koran Theater. Lily Tomlin's there, and they're not happy, and they have a Meyer PA. So I go out there, and it was very interesting. I expected to talk to the sound person and maybe the stage manager. So I get there right as one of the performances is ending. And so I'm just kind of standing out there, and then I go into the sound booth and introduce myself to the sound person. And so she says, well, I have to go and get everything reset and everything ready. And I said, that's okay, I'll just wait here and we can talk when you're done. And then the stage manager comes up to the window there, because we were back in a little room. And she says, Mark? And I said, yeah. She said, Lily wants to talk to you.
Oh, boy.
And, I'd never had that, okay. So I go there, and she was mad. She was pretty unhappy. And she said, did you get a chance to, walk around? And I said, yeah. And she said, well, what'd you think? And I said, well, individually, all the systems sounded pretty good. And then she interrupted me and said, it sounds like,
yeah,
and I said, okay, so hold on. I said individually it sounded pretty good, but and this was the typical theater setup where they had, systems that were broken up and covering all different areas of the room. So
right, yeah.
You didn't have like a left and a right cluster. You had one that focused on the orchestra. You had one that focused on the balcony. You might have had 2, boxes and all that. And they weren't working together. So you're getting all sorts of weird delays and
filtering and
it's weird. And Lily has exceptional hearing. Exceptional. She could hear stuff that I wouldn't even imagine to hear. So I said, they're not working together. It's a system, but it's not working together. And she said, well, can you fix it? And I said, yeah, I think we can. And so I go back and I talk with John Meyer, and I talk with Bob McCarthy, who was the one of the engineers there that was heavily involved in developing SIM. And so we kind of gather up all our things and go out there and clean up the system. And there were some other issues with the system. And so we deal with that, and we get everything going. And she's pretty happy with it. And then they closed the show in San Francisco, and the next stop was Washington, D.C., and we hadn't really heard anything from her, like, do you want us to go to Washington, or do you want us, are you done with us, or what? And she said, well, I just kind of assumed that you were going to Washington. So I said, okay, ship everything to Washington.
Oh, boy.
So we did, and we actually, that's what we would do for the next year, is we'd go and do the setup and work on the systems, and then turn them back over to her. And it was really, again, for me, really kind of eye-opening and an educational time. And even some things, Lily is, like I said, she's got kind of a reputation as being somebody difficult to work with, but she was always, like, to us, she was challenging, to be sure, but she was always grateful for the work that we did, and gracious. And there were a couple of instances that really stand out in my mind. One of them was we had some problems, not with our gear, but with some other pieces of equipment. And she called everybody back into her dressing room after the show, and she just kind of goes around, to everybody and saying, what happened, and what happened, and what happened. And she gets to us, and she says, okay, so now we know, there's this problem. And she said, why didn't you say anything about it? And we said, well, it didn't really have anything to do with the speakers. And she said, are we all in here talking about the sound? And we said, yeah. And she said, could you fix what was wrong with the sound? And we said, well, yeah. And she says, fix the sound. It's like, yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. But that kind of, shaped how I approach things. It's like, it may not specifically be my area, but it's attached to it in some way, shape, or form. So I have to deal with it.
The overall experience.
Yeah.
Right? So whether it's the audience experience with the artist.
Right.
Yeah.
So we did, and she really kind of took a liking to us, and she to placate her. A lot of people in the industry had told her things like her voice crosses over at 800 cycles, so she needs speakers that cross over at 800 cycles, and because of the characteristics of her voice, she needed an extra bump at 2K, and we're thinking that's not right. But that's what she was told. So we go in one day for a rehearsal, and we're actually there's 3 instances with her. So we go in for a rehearsal, and she's being real fidgety during rehearsal. And it's like, what's going on? She's being real fidgety, and she says, it's just too cold in here. And I'm thinking, it's not cold. She says, so she tells one of her production managers, can you go into my dressing room and get my sweater? And she goes and she says, okay. So she goes into the dressing room, and she just she's facing the audience area where we are, and she just kind of drapes the arms over, and it's like, just hanging over her. And she starts to go it again, and then she turns around, and on the back of the sweatshirt, it was a sweatshirt, it said, do these speakers cross over at 800 hertz? And then she reaches out and flips it around, and the other side said, and where's my 2K? And,
oh my gosh.
And then me and Bob McCarthy at that point know that we've been had and part of a practical joke.
Right. That's hilarious.
Yeah, it was hilarious. And I have to, there's a picture of that after backstage of us back there with her in the sweatshirt, and we're laughing about it and having a good time. It's somewhere on my Facebook page. And then the other time, which was we were in previews. So for those who are not familiar with the theater world, a preview is a paid rehearsal. So the audience comes in and watches a rehearsal.
Right.
And they come in with the understanding that things may stop, things may get redone, things may change a bit. And so we're doing a preview, and I can't remember the town that we're doing it in. And what we had done is we had we used CP10 EQs, and we had a rack of, I think, 3 of them that we were using, and we had put cover plates on them so that nobody would mess with them, or they wouldn't move or anything like that. So we would take that from stop to stop so that the changes that we would have to do would be minimal theoretically. So we start the show, and things are kind of going pretty good. And Bob McCarthy and I are up in the balcony of the show, and like I said, people had kind of been saying, she doesn't know what she's talking about, this and that and the other, and we're looking at Sim, and Bob says, look at that. It looks like this filter has shifted just a little teeny bit. And I mean, it wasn't very wide, and it wasn't very much. So he just sits there and moves it. I mean, imperceptible to anybody else, literally. And And immediately she stops the show.
She heard it.
And she said, Bob. And Bob had never been called out at a preview or a show before. And he had worked, practically every Broadway show that was popular at the time, Cats and Les Mis and, all these things. And he finally goes, yes. And she says, did you just change something? And he went, yes. And she said, well, I don't like it, put it back. Yes, ma'am. And I mean, literally, it was imperceptible.
That's crazy.
Imperceptible.
That's crazy.
And she went on and she was perfectly happy with the show. And there is no way that she could have known that we had done it.
She couldn't see you.
We were in the balcony.
Right.
Far, far away. So, it's just like, okay, she's got a fine-tuned sense of hearing.
Yeah.
So that was interesting. And at that point, it kind of became my mission at Meyer Sound to get some of the difficult acts. So my next mission was to get Anita Baker, who had the same kind of reputation. And I guess I'm proud to say that it was not without its problems, but again, she had a finely tuned sense of hearing, and she was told that she was, crazy by other people, and it's like, we don't think you're crazy. We just think that there's an issue with communication between. So we worked really hard to get nomenclature, terminology, so that she could understand it or we could understand what she was saying.
So you end up being on the same page.
Right.
Yeah. Yep.
So that was Anita's tour was really good, and we made it a year, which was longer than any other sound company had made it at that point. So in those days then so you worked for Meyer. Yeah.
And so was there a sound company involved, or was Meyer working directly with the artist?
There's always a sound company involved.
Okay. Yeah.
So we supported the artist and the sound company.
Yeah.
And there were no charge for our services either, because we figured at that point, if it worked and it made it better, then it helped our reputation, and it was something that we could hang our hats on.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Doing that. So,
yeah. I mean, that's probably a big part of their success. I mean,
yes.
For a very long time,
so,
Meyer was the standard in particular for theater.
Yes. Yeah. So, and Anita Baker was kind of the, saying, well, okay, let's get into the contemporary music world.
Yeah.
The Grateful Dead had been a long-term client, but yes, and some other moments that just kind of stand out to me. Well, when we were doing Anita Baker, I had this colleague, and he would. I'm blabbling on, so I can.
No, this is great. This is great.
We would kind of have a contest on which clients we could get for the company, because what we would do is we would go out and look for clients, and then hook them up with a sound company.
Okay.
And
so when you say look for clients, like an artist, you would
yeah.
So you'd reach out to their production people or to the artist directly and
exactly.
Tell them how great Meyer is
and yeah. So and actually the way I got Anita was she had heard a demo of our HD1 studio monitors, and that's another interesting story. And if we have time, I'm happy to tell it.
Yeah, we got time.
She called up the factory. And so I dealt with all the artists at that time, or the majority of the artists at that time, and so I was in another part of the factory, and I, over the intercom, Mark Johnson calling line 1, Mark Johnson calling. So I get back to my desk and I pick up the phone, and I go, "Hello, this is Mark," and she goes, "Hi, Mark, this is Anita Baker." Actually, she was going by Anita Bridgeforth at that time.
Okay.
And she said, I'm otherwise known as Anita Baker. And of course, I could identify her voice right away because she had had all those hits and all that. And
Yeah.
I was like, okay, hi, nice to meet you. How's it going? And she said, well, I just heard a demo of your HD1s. And she said, I'm in love with these speakers. And the demo is over and done with, and the speakers are shipped out. She said, but it's like your first kiss. It's something that you always remember. That's how she termed it.
Oh my gosh.
And she says, how can I get these speakers? And I'm thinking, in my head, I'm going, she's got a lot of money. So I'm thinking, you could just buy a pair.
Them, yeah.
Right. Well, artists, I guess, have a certain ego, and they don't want to, buy things, even though that they can well afford it. And so I said, well, I would really like it if you went out on tour with a Meyer system. And she said, well, that's not my decision. That's my production people's decision. I said, that's fine. I just want the opportunity to do a demo for them so that they could make the decision. She said, I can set that up. So we did that, and that's how we got the thing, and she got her speakers.
She got her speakers.
Yeah. But
that's kind of cool.
yeah, but the HD1 story was kind of cool because we had developed them, and even in the factory, and those that were kind of deeply involved in the production and development of them, or development and production, were just kind of like, these things are amazing. These things are pretty darn good. And we had some friends who are local recording engineers and things like that come in and say, yeah, these are good. And I was in charge of marketing at the time, and I said, well, we got to get, these guys are nice guys and they're good guys and they're locally known, but we got to get some nationally or internationally known people involved with this, so that they can endorse them. And they said, well, who? And I said, well, maybe we could get like Roger Nichols. And they said, could we get him? And I said, we could try. And I kind of had an ace up my sleeve because Roger was married to a friend of my ex-wife's, who wasn't still my wife at the time. They used to sing together in a trio.
Uh-huh.
And so I got home from work and I said, hey, can you call Connie so I could talk to Roger? So she did. And then she said, Connie, actually, my husband wants to talk to your husband. So I talked to him for a little while, and he said, yeah, I've used the Meyer speakers at Stevie Wonder's studio, and I've used them around. And I said, well, we have some new studio monitors that we think are pretty good, and we would love your opinion of them. So it took a while for us to kind of coordinate getting him out there. We got him out to the factory, and he spent the day with us, and we took him all over different rooms. We took him to the demo room, which was acoustically treated. So he said, yeah, they sound pretty good, okay. Well, let's try them here. And we took them in a place where we could simulate kind of like a mixing desk and see what would happen, and in terms of reflections off the console, and this and that and the other. And one of the things that Roger liked to tell was, we had our CP10 equalizer, and he said, do you have like a high quality, high resolution equalizer? I said, yeah, we do. So we set it up there, and he kept adjusting, and he goes, okay, there. That's what sounds right to me. And then we all looked at the EQ, and it was all back to zero on all the settings. And he goes, okay. And then he left. He left, and it was like, okay, this is kind of weird. He said, yeah, they're kind of all right. And Helen called me in. She said, well, what did he think? And I said, I'm not sure. I think he liked them, but he left, and he didn't seem as taken with them as we all were. Yeah. And so it was kind of it was kind of disheartening. And about a week later, he called me back and he said, I keep thinking about those speakers, and I need them for a project that I'm working on.
Kind of like that first Kiss thing.
Yes, exactly. And so I said, well, Roger, what you heard were prototypes. So that literally the amps and the processing were in a rack.
All right.
At this point, separate from the speakers.
Yeah.
And the HD1s, when they hit the market, were self-powered, and that was always the intent. But I said, and besides, John Meyer never lets any prototype out of the factory for any reason whatsoever. And he said, yeah, but I'm working on this project, and what I have to do is take mixes from all over the place. Other mixes, other tracks, other studios.
Oh yeah.
Even mixes from lesser quality recording things.
Yeah.
And put them all together in this record that I'm working on. And I said, I don't know. I'll go ask John. So I told John, and he said, yeah, we could do that. It's like, yeah. We're passing out because he's. So we pack up everything, and I literally have to fly it down to Village Recorders in Southern California, and go in and set it up, and set it up for him. And then he was going to do the mix and then pack them up and send them back to me. And the project was Ricky Lee Jones' Flying Cowboys album.
Very cool.
That was produced by Walter Becker. And so at that point, then it just our relationship with Roger really started taking off. And those that knew him or knew of his career, he's not only was he a great recording engineer, but he was also a nuclear scientist. So he latched on to So he latched on to SIM right away. So he also had a SIM machine that he would carry around to various locations. So he became a huge supporter of Meyer products too, as well. So in my time at Meyer Sound, which was a span of 17-year period, was great educational time for me in the world of. And this was actually one of their ads, but the art and science of sound.
Yeah.
I really learned a lot about both during that time, and for me, it was a fabulous time. I met a lot of my musical heroes. I was invited to jam once on stage with Steely Dan, but I don't play anything well enough to do that, so I had to say thank you, but it would definitely bring down the level of your performance. One day I was in New York, and I did demos in the morning for stage monitors for Lou Reed, and in the evening I met Les Paul, Herbie Hancock, George Duke, just some of these amazing musicians and people too.
Yeah.
Tuck and Patty, who are lesser known but still incredible musicians, and it was just a really interesting time for me.
I think that was an interesting time in our industry.
Yes.
Too. A lot of companies, were up and coming then, and the fact that you worked directly with John Meyer,
Yeah.
Fast forward a bunch of years, I don't know, if you can just call up John or Helen, I think that's cool. And I think everything now's become a little more commercial, even on the artist side, and, working directly with them, I think it's not quite what it was, in those days.
It's definitely, the industry has changed, and I tell this a lot to the students. Buford Jones, who's another well-known name in the world of live audio, and Dana, where I work too, we all come from, the early days of live sound, where literally the first mixers I used were Shure M67s bussed together.
Yeah.
And using the vocal master columns and things like that. Buford and Dana all have stories of really kind of a rough and ready, and they've used the term kind of cowboy, where it's just kind of go in and you do things that we wouldn't think of doing, anymore. And I even watched the Woodstock movie, and saw people like, on the top of scaffolding towers without any safety gear, and it's like, yikes,
Yeah.
And so it's changed a lot, and I tell students that it's when people used to think, when they have those what my parents think,
Right.
what my friends think, and what really happens, cartoons and things like that, or memes. I tell them now, it developed and it grew through stages, and it's quite a noble industry, and a noble profession, and the people in the profession now are very serious about what they do and what kind of jobs they do. They're there to do a good job. They're there to work hard, and as an industry, it's become, for lack of a better word, more brutal. It's harder to get a job. Well, maybe not now because of the boom, the post-COVID boom, but you really have to prove yourself. You have to have a ton of soft skills, like good interpersonal relations, ability to talk to people and communicate well, and you have to ultimately you have to really know your craft, and there's so much behind it these days. You just can't kind of go in and wing it anymore. You really have to.
I would agree with that. I think all these things were developed since the 70s and in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, and so our tools to do our job have gotten way more complex, sophisticated, solve a lot of problems. All the problems that you encountered back then before SIM existed, and so I think, which has allowed us to make the productions better and more sophisticated. And now, I say post-COVID, we're not really post yet, but that's bringing a whole nother level of complexity to, where, I've heard we're in this experience economy now where everybody wants this incredible experience. So our shows are like that. So therefore, the people that are the new people coming up into these shows, and guys like you that have been in the industry as long as you have, and I'm, about half as much, but we bring all this experience, and we learn the hard way, and the people up and coming have to learn how to use these tools and understand what's at stake on any show, and really take it to heart, right?
But their gestation period is much shorter now, because they have things at their disposal like Full Sail and people who have years and years and years of experience.
Those things weren't there back.
Yeah.
So it makes sense. And also, I think, in those days, people probably wouldn't have ever dreamt of being a sound guy.
Right.
Like, you were supposed to be an accountant or a lawyer or a doctor or, AC technician, whatever it was, bricklayer, like what your parents did. And I just think people didn't really think of it. But now it's, maybe partly the internet, partly just productions. People know it's out there. And Full Sail, of course, being kind of a pioneer, really. What is it, 40 years now? 40?
40, yeah.
40, yeah.
42, I think.
Yeah, so really pioneering, really, if you consider that. But really when, 20 years ago or 22, 23 years ago when I was there, I kind of stumbled across it because my sister wanted to go to a school like that.
Okay.
And, when she first brought that idea to me, I'm like, oh, there's no school for that. And, oh, yeah, there's actually a couple.
Yeah.
But, yeah. So 17 years at Meyer. So what prompted the change there?
It's really interesting. And I love John and Helen, and they're great people. And I don't know if they're going to hear this or not, but those of us that had been with the company for a long time, because when I joined the company, I was employee number 46. So they had 46 employees in the company before me, still kind of young and still kind of growing.
Yeah.
And when I left the company, there was like over 225 employees.
Yeah.
So during that time period, it had grown, immensely.
Yeah.
And we used to refer to John and Helen as mom and dad sometimes,
Yeah.
Not necessarily in front of them to their face, but it's just like, but just like any family, sometimes it's like, okay, it's time for me to move on. And I had a friend in the industry who was a publisher of a lot of magazines, Mix, Sound and Video Contractor, Electronic Musician, and some other ones. And again, the whole networking thing, he's a guy that I had met years before and had a professional relationship, developed a friendship relationship. And he called me up and he said, hey, why don't you come work for me and run one of my magazines? And I'm thinking, I was not an English major.
All right.
Why, he wanted me to be the editor. And he said, well, there's two kinds of editors. There's ones that know the English language and can deal with that, and we have one there. But the other kind of editor that we need is the subject matter experts, the ones that know the industry, things like that. And that's what we need for this particular magazine. So I said, okay, that sounds like fun, and my current wife and I, we always kind of joke, we're up for an adventure, I hadn't met her at that point, but I was, okay, time to try something new. And so I went over there, and it was before everything crashed in 2008. So I guess this was maybe around 2003, something like that. And so, but things were still starting to run kind of lean and mean. So it was basically me as the editor. I had a managing editor, an assistant editor, and an art director, and everybody else was contract. And so us four people would effectively put the magazine together. I would come up with ideas or themes or things like that for an issue, and we would, then hire the appropriate writers. And I had probably about 4 or 5 people that I depended on for good content. And then other people would pitch things to me and things like that. And so we did that. And in one of the very first meetings we had, the guy who was the managing, and all of them had been in the publishing industry, so I was kind of the outlier, but I was their boss, right? And one guy, the managing editor, was very wary of me. It's like, he doesn't know us. He's not a part of the publishing industry, because now I am an outsider, right?
Yeah.
But we're having a kind of just a meeting, kind of, and he says, what I really would like to do is win this award. It was a prestigious award for publications called an Eddie, EDDIE.
Now, is that specific to industry, or is that all publications, like magazine publications?
Magazine publications.
So you're just competing with mainstream stuff you see in the supermarket?
Yes.
All right.
Yeah. And I said, well, let's give it a shot. And we didn't really think about it much after that. We just worked hard to put together the best magazine that we could. And fortunately, I was able to win him over I'm pretty proud of my work ethic that I think I'd kind of proven in other aspects of the industry that I really focus hard. And we worked on the magazine, and I was able to do some really nice things with it. I thought where at that point a lot of the technical publications, you'd see pictures of gear, and I said, what's the thing that's missing in this picture of gear in a rack? And it's like the people who drive it. In every situation, people drive these pieces of equipment. And
people are always more interesting than gear.
Yeah. So I started trying to feature people more in the magazine, which heretofore, and there were a lot of great editors of Sound and Video Contractor magazine before me.
By the way, hold on a second. I'm just going to, just for the camera, this is total coincidence, but...
Coincidence? I don't think so. So, I mean, people who are well respected in the industry, but just like everything else, it goes through peaks and valleys. So, I really tried to bring my sensibilities. Like, I had called one guy who wrote a lot of the. And actually, he's a guy that I knew from Meyer Sound. He wrote a lot of the technical publications for Meyer, and I said he was a contract writer as well, and I said, can you write some stuff for Sound and Video Contractor? Bruce Borgerson, who's a fabulous writer and has a really good grasp of technical concepts and things like that. And I remember I'm driving home, stuck on the freeway in my car, and I was just thinking about, do they call it PA or do they call it sound reinforcement? And so I called him up. I was stuck in traffic, and I called him up and I said, hey, what do you think about this idea? Let's do an article about, is it PA or sound reinforcement, and what the differences are. And he interviewed, all sorts of industry people, well known at the time, and things like that. And after it got published, Bruce sent me a note, and he says, hey, I made Wikipedia thanks to you. And there was an article in Wikipedia, and it referenced our article in the magazine.
The difference between the two.
Yeah, and it referenced our article in the magazine, so he got a reference in Wikipedia. So
that's cool.
So there was that, and then we were doing an article about an install in, I think it was a Hilton Hotel in Houston. That was actually, the installation was through a friend of mine, Bill Schuerman, and he had done the installation, and he'd said, hey, I'd really like to, and he's the guy that I met when I was at Meyer, right?
Okay.
And he said, I'd like to feature this installation in your magazine if I could. And so he flew me out there and showed me all the things, and it was a very cool installation. I mean, they did everything. They did the background music speakers, they did the main speakers in the ballroom, they had the latest in networking. Again, this was in the early 2000s. Yeah. And the interconnectivity, and it was just a very cool installation.
Probably some CobraNet in there.
Probably, yeah. But one of the things that they also did was LED, or in this case plasma, wayfinding kiosks.
Oh, right.
That had, and that was a relatively new thing. And so we set up a photo session for the cover for the magazine that had actually the owner of the company that did the consulting company pull in behind a little suitcase with his girlfriend next to him, standing in front of the
kiosk.
The kiosk, right? And that's the picture we took, and that became the cover of the magazine. And then we did the article, and we compile the magazine, and we do all the other things, and we get back the magazine, and I had been with the company for about 3 years at this point, and we're me and my managing editor and assistant editor and art director kind of looking at it, and it's like, this is pretty nice. Everything kind of went together the way we wanted it to, and it looks good and it reads well. Let's enter this magazine
for the
Eddie Award. And so we did, and we all promptly forgot about it. And then sadly, the industry was starting to crash
Right.
at that point. So it wound up that they laid off everybody in my staff. So my managing editor, my assistant editor, and my art director. The art director got transferred to another magazine, and the managing editor and assistant editor got laid off. And I inherited some staff that all had some other magazine responsibilities. And so it was a very sad time. And, it's just like, oh man, I was just getting, we were getting in the groove.
Yeah.
And so I had hired back my assistant editor for a contract thing. So I said, well, let's just meet at your old desk and we'll talk about it. And so we're sitting at her old desk, and she noticed that the message light was on her phone. And she says, I'll see if my access code still works. And it still worked. And she said, oh, I think this is something for you. I'll forward it to you. So she forwarded it up to me, and we finished our discussion and things like that. And so when I went back up to my office, I picked up the message, and it was, Mr. Johnson, or my name is so-and-so. I'm calling about the Eddie Awards, and your entry, please call me back. And it's like,
Oh.
okay, all right. So I called them back, and they said, yeah, we just want you to know that your magazine is a finalist, and the final judging is going to happen this day and this time. And I said, wow, okay, cool. So the person, and I'll add that the person who hired me for that job had since left the company. So while I was there and he was there, I'd approach him for, information things and things like that. And he'd sit in on meetings, and he would say, well, everything's going the way I think it should go. And he would leave the meeting. And he was fairly good to work with. And the other management team that I inherited were more micromanaging and didn't trust me because I didn't come from the industry.
Right.
And they were all based in Southern California anyway, and thought that we were all kind of, loosey-goosey hippies up in Northern California.
Right.
And so I called them up and said, hey, I just got a message that we're finalists for. No, I sent an email. We're finalists for the Eddie Award, and the woman who was my editorial director at that point had already won 2 or 3 in her career, and they were kind of unbelieving and astonished. It's like, we need more information. And so I forwarded the information to them, and it's like, oh, okay. And it turned out in that particular category, kind of like the Grammys, the best, and that's kind of the relationship. The Eddie Awards are kind of like the Grammys or the Oscars for the publishing industry, so it's pretty high level. And we were actually both in the same category for technical publications. Her magazine that she edited was in the same running, so there were 3 magazines
As finalists.
Competing. Hers, mine, and something from somebody else's. So it was kind of weird that my boss's magazine was in the same category, and so the art director that we had, that we're using now, lived in New York. So this was kind of the first early throes of people working remotely and things like that. So she went to the ceremony, and I said, be sure to call me with the results. So she said, "Will do." So on the day of the award ceremony, she called me up and she said, "Well, you won gold." And I went, "What?" You know, and then I said, "What about Cynthia?" And it's like, "We got bronze." So at that point, then I gained a little more respect, but
Right.
it was still a very proud moment for me in the world of publishing.
That's incredible.
Yeah, and then shortly after that, I was let go, and
Wow.
and then I went to work for Church Production Magazine. And I
Okay.
did that for about 3 more years, and the industry at that point was just kind of so I got let go of them.
Yeah,
And,
yeah. Well, that was a tough period there.
Yeah, it was
That's-
very tough.
So,
Yeah.
and that's how you ended up at Full Sail after that?
Kind of. I did, at that point, I just did a lot of freelance production work, freelance writing and editing, and, you know.
And where are you living? Where are you living at this point?
Northern California.
Still in Northern
Still in
California,
Northern
okay.
California. I had, at the point that I got let go from Sound and Video Contractor was also the same point that I got divorced. And so then I was single, and I just was renting a small house, and then I met my current wife, and then we got married, and we were living still in Northern California, and I was just doing, again, freelance work and stuff like that, and writing. I set up an office in the house that she had owned, and we existed. And back in my Meyer days, early in my Meyer days, I had heard about a school that was forming in Central Florida, and well, they had formed, but they were starting to do some live production education.
Yeah, I kind of remember when all that was starting. Yeah.
So I was at a trade show, actually in Europe, and I saw that Full Sail was attending. They were at the trade show. They had a booth at the trade show. So I went over there, and Gary Jones was there, and John Phelps was there, and I introduced myself, and I said, "I'm from Meyer Sound, and I'd really like to do a demo for you guys." And they said, "Well, the guy you need to talk to is Dana Round. He's back in the States, but here's a contact number." And so when I got back to the States, I called and set up a time to do a demo, and we did a really big, extensive demo with live sound stuff, recording stuff, and
Yeah.
developed at that point a great relationship with Full Sail. John Meyer had come out a few times and given presentations, and we had set up one of their studios, Studio A at the time, and Dana had bought a bunch of the PA equipment, and he had an MSL3 system that they had used. One of their early uses was for a Stevie Wonder gig that they had done out in the parking lot, and over the years, again, networking, I had just kind of kept up a relationship with Dana. So fast forward to mid 2000s, and I'm writing an article about technical education for Church Production Magazine. I didn't work for them any longer, but I was contracting my services for them. And so one of the organizations they wanted me to contact was Full Sail. So I called Full Sail, talked to their PR person, and I said, "Oh, by the way, is Dana Round still there?" And she said, "Yeah, he's actually going to be the one that answers all of your questions that you just sent me." It's like, "Oh, cool. Tell him Mark Johnson says hello." So about 20 minutes after I hang up with her, my phone rings, and it's Dana.
It's Dana.
So we catch up, found that our personal lives had taken kind of similar paths. And he says, "Well, what are you doing?" And I said, "I'm just doing freelance production and freelance writing and editing, things like that." And he says, "Why don't you come work for me out here?" And I said, "Are you serious?" And he said, "Yeah, absolutely. I have a position open that I'm I'm hiring for
So
it.
another adventure.
Yes. So I asked my wife, and we were relatively newlywed at that point, and it's like, what do you think? And she goes, I'm up for an adventure. So we pack up everything and move out here. And that was about 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about your time there. I mean, we've been going a little while now, but I'm having fun.
Mm-hmm.
And it's super interesting to me. So hopefully, I'm sure our audience think the same thing. So
I hope so.
But
who is this old fart
you
blathering on?
I almost think you could almost do a separate podcast on just 10 years at Full Sail.
Yeah.
I mean, just because I believe in them. As a alumni, and as a vendor, and just
well, your support has
yeah.
been phenomenal.
I appreciate
as far as
that.
I'm concerned, yeah.
And but anyway, so I know lots of people that have gone there, and I think it's a great place. And then of course to have people like you working there, I think that's really what regardless of what it is, whether it's you're writing an article about an install or a teacher at Full, but it's always about the people,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, it's the people that make things great. It's
Right.
not this microphone,
Right.
I mean, it's a great microphone, but
How you use it. Who's going to use it, and how are they going to use it?
Yep. So you pack up, you move to Florida, which is culturally a lot different than Northern California.
A bit, yeah, just a bit.
So now, did you come in because you're the program director? Did you
Right.
come in as the program director? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So, and was show production? Now I can't remember. Was show production already up and running? I know when I was there, we had a show production class we did for a month or two.
Right. Show
But
production.
that's a whole program that was.
Right. It
Yep.
started out as a workshop within the recording arts
Yep. And
program.
that's what I did. Yeah.
Then it grew into an associate's degree. And then about 2 years before I got there, it grew into a bachelor's degree. And Dana was, I guess, officially or unofficially, the program director for the show production program because he started it.
That's right. Yeah.
But then he became the education director for the audio arts, which under his auspices was show production,
Yeah.
recording arts, and music production. Since then, audio production has started under his wing, and that's I think 6-year-old program at this point. So
Yeah. So he needed help because that's
Yeah,
a lot.
yeah.
So as he got promoted to this new position overseeing everything, you came in and running show production.
right.
So what's that been like? I mean, totally different than running shows and flying around the world with Anita Baker.
Yeah.
And certainly the writing. I mean, so now we're educating younger. Well,
Yeah.
most of them younger.
Yeah. Majority.
Yeah, but people that are aspiring to work in our industry or improve their skills, right? So.
Yeah. It was, I would say that's probably the biggest change that I've made in the industry. And in one sense, I've prided myself to have a background enough that kind of allowed me to move around in the industry. Because regardless, I've always kind of stayed in one aspect of the industry or the other, but I've never really kind of left overall. But the way things work at Full Sail, you get hired because of your industry experience.
Right.
Again, you're a subject matter expert or an industry expert. But I find that it matters some because you have to have street credibility when you're talking with your instructors, which are all people with industry experience.
Right.
But other than that, it doesn't matter. So I learned and am still learning the business of education,
Yeah.
which is it's a whole nother world, and it's been a big challenge for me to just learn about education, because I mean, never before have I talked about rubrics or program learning outcomes or course learning outcomes or some of the things that are,
which all relate to your accreditation and everything, right?
Right.
Which is super important.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's the things that we have to do to maintain accreditation and that have nothing to do with the world of production in any way, shape, or form. So,
right.
So that's been the big challenge for me, which again, I'm learning something. Here I am. I'm 67 years old, right, and I'm still learning something. It may not be production industry related, but I'm learning. So I'm just keeping on learning. So that's
so
good.
I mean, so you got the program director, you've got a course director, and then you've got your lab
specialist.
Lab specialists. Mm-hmm. And then of course, you've got the students. So, in my experience, just knowing you over this time, your students still know who you are, right? So you're not just locked up in your office writing curriculums. I mean, you're still working with students and I would hazard to probably mentoring some of them in some ways.
Some, yeah. I mean, I am locked up in my office quite a bit. Sometimes more often than I like. But some students I get to meet with, and some students have challenges, and you like to mentor them and help them along, and other students have no challenges, and they're very high level students, and they assume high level positions once they get out and start working in the industry, and you like knowing them, and I kind of have a rule that I've stuck to it mostly is that I'm not going to be your Facebook friend while you're here. Once you graduate, and if you want to and you want to send me an invite, then I'll accept it. But I'm not going to be your Facebook friend.
Keep a professional.
Friend. Yeah,
that makes sense.
But so there are a number of them who have graduated, and next thing I know, so and so wants to be your friend. So it's and that's kind of gratifying. It's like, oh, they remembered me, or they thought about me, or
Well, so I would say that can be really gratifying to know that maybe you're a part of somebody's education that's gone off and become really successful. Mm-hmm. Maybe on tour with you name the artist. So
right.
Are there any students that stand out like that for you that you had a personal relationship with that have gone on and done some cool things?
There's a couple. Brandon Blackwell. Pre-COVID, he was out with Lizzo, and I'm not sure who he's out with right now, but he's always very busy.
Yeah.
But now he's endorsed by many manufacturers and has great relationships with a lot of the manufacturers, and even interesting. Sometimes I'll, when something, he's done a post on Facebook and something pops up, I'll see people who I have as friends and industry colleagues, in his, it's like, oh gee, I see that he met so and so.
Yeah, so he knows a lot of the same people. Yeah,
which is kind of interesting. But he's one. Kimberly Thomas, who's had kind of a circuitous route through the industry, but she's always been very smart and always worked really hard and done a really good job at some of the places that she's gone to. So it's again, it's at this point in my career, I think it's important, for me, and gratifying to share the industry with the young people.
Yeah.
I hate saying that sometimes, you young people.
Yeah.
But the younger people, or at least the people who aspire to be in this industry, because it's in an industry back when I started, when people really didn't think it was an industry. And I remember having a conversation with a guy who was an independent engineer for different acts, and also did work with Jim Gamble for Gamble Consoles, which is, which was one of the big touring consoles back in the day. I was talking to him, and Kevin Korecki was his name, and we were talking about the industry, and he said, "Hey man, it's not an industry, it's a club."
Yeah.
And it's got that kind of vibe. Everybody knows everybody else.
Yeah.
And I think even though it's grown, it's still that way.
Yeah.
So just bringing up the people in this career that is once considered kind of a cowboy, kind of you're a loner, or you're a some kind of outsider or something like that, to where it's really come together. It's as I said earlier, it's a noble profession.
Yeah.
And the people in the profession care deeply about the jobs that they do, and work to make sure that to use an old catchphrase, the show must go on.
Yeah. I think it's great that you get to be a part of that. I sometimes think that maybe when maybe a little later in life, I think I would like to do more teaching and just mentoring, and I think it's a great thing that you're doing. And we try to do it a little bit with this podcast. I mean, it's Sound Connection, is connecting people. So we don't know who's going to listen, but there's going to be people out here listening that are hopefully will draw, either learn something from this conversation or get some inspiration from this conversation. Like I said, you do it every day. We just do it every 2 weeks.
I think the thing is you may just do this podcast every 2 weeks, but I know for a fact that you're a fairly frequent visitor to the campus, and I know for a fact that you've loaned your time, talents, and treasures to some of the things that we've done and helped students along.
Yeah.
So
it's always fun.
Yeah, and I think that for some reason, those of us in this club, that's the way we feel as we kind of move along in the progression of our careers. Maybe even more so than if you were a doctor or a lawyer or whatever. We feel compelled to make sure that those who come after us are well equipped, or
I think I think we're just, some of us are wired that way, where we want to give back. Maybe even, I would imagine, doctors and lawyers too at some point. There's some of them that want to make that time and give their knowledge, and there's probably some that don't, but not that there's anything wrong with that either. But I enjoy it. I get, it gives me, I feel gratified when I'm able to do it. And even though I never love getting up and talking in front of a bunch of people, as much as I talk, you'd think I'd like to. But,
I hate it.
I still don't love it. So, well, anyway, I want to thank you for coming today.
Oh, my pleasure.
I mean,
again, I'm honored that you would even consider me.
This is great. I had a great time on this. So, I really appreciate your time today and that you came out. And so I just want to say to the audience, thanks for listening, and hope to see you here next time on our next episode of Sound Connections.